No, do you know the poverty rate in this country?
I believe it is in the teens.
In the teens, okay. Well, it's about a little over 11%. It just strikes me that most of all your testimony is always about the tax cuts and cutting costs, and it's always about tax cuts, and it's always about the rich. But nothing is ever said about poor, other than you suggesting that you worked yourself.
When Scott Bessant was asked a straightforward question about the poverty rate in America today, his hesitation wasn't just a moment of doubt. It revealed a deeper issue, the continuous oversight of poverty and how policy debates often revolve around the interests of the wealthy. This incident underscored a major disconnect between those in power and the challenges faced by millions of Americans living in poverty. As discussions on economic well-being frequently focus on stock market trends and tax breaks for the rich, the daily struggles of ordinary families are often eclipsed, highlighting the necessity for a more inclusive conversation that directly addresses poverty.
Texas, Ms. Garcia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Secretary for being with us today. I want to start first by just clarifying your testimony and its delivery. Why did you ask for your witness statement to be embargoed until this morning?
Sorry, pardon me?
Your testimony reads right at the very top, embargoed until delivery, which means that we didn't follow the usual practice of this committee of getting the testimony 24 hours in advance so that committee members can review it and prepare for questions. Yours was posted at 10:01. The committee was at 10. Well, it looks like you need...
My staff is just telling me that it's standard practice.
It's your standard practice? It's not our standard practice as a committee.
I'm told that it was standard practice.
Okay, you were told by whom, sir?
So my comms team and legislative affairs team working with the committee.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think for the record, I think you should clarify to the gentleman that that is not our standard. And I know that at least I didn't know anything about this until I got it here, and I don't think our committee staff on the Democratic side was notified that we would be getting all your testimony late. I just wondered, why you had made that request, and clearly at the top, embargoed until delivery.
Well, embargo to delivery, I think that was mostly meant for the press.
We're not press, sir. We're the members of Congress that have oversight. So, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that you not condone this kind of late submission. It just doesn't help, frankly, for some of the atmosphere that's created when we all just sit down and we still don't have your testimony. Well, then, we just sort of don't feel really good about that. It's not our custom.
Congresswoman, I appreciate the importance that you put on my statement.
Well, thank you. Notice is important, sir. Do you know what the poverty rate is in our country?
I believe that the poverty level is a fixed number.
No, do you know the poverty rate in this country?
I believe it is in the teens.
In the teens, okay. Well, it's about a little over 11%. It just strikes me that most of all your testimony is always about the tax cuts and cutting costs, and it's always about tax cuts, and it's always about the rich. But nothing is ever said about poor, other than you suggesting that you worked yourself
No, ma'am.
college.
No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime.
Sir, I read your testimony. That's not anywhere in here.
Deductibility.
That is not in here, sir.
Deductibility.
I am referring to your
loans.
testimony and what I've listened to. I said right up front, I can see you and I can hear you. You've not said one thing about what we're doing to help the poor. In fact,
none of your colleagues
even when we
have
were
asked me.
talking, even when we were talking about the car seats, that impacts poor people more than anyone else, because not only can they usually not even afford a car seat and have to go to a garage sale to find one, now it's going to be even higher. Your president is suggesting that he wants to give a $5,000 bonus to women to have babies, and then what? Just leave them out on the cold alone? No car seat, no food, no Medicaid, no no chip
Congresswoman,
program?
I can tell you the worst.
And I'm asking you right now, sir.
The
that
worst thing
you-
for
you
working
need- you
families
need to-
will be
as a
the
treasurer-
expiration of the 2017
As Secretary of Treasurer,
Tax
it's not
Cuts and
just
Jobs
about
Act.
the inflation rate. It's not just about the GDP. It's also about making sure that we keep the poverty rate in this country low. There are people who are living in poverty that never have lived in poverty before. You know, you also failed to say here, you say unemployment remains low. I mean, the Senate should have read unemployment went up.
Ma'am,
Because it did.
Under the Biden administration,
And the growth
we
administration, we're not talking
experienced
about Biden, sir. We're
record
talking
food bank
about your
usage.
testimony here
Record food
today
bank usage.
about the current president and his plans. Because I can tell you, I'm from Houston. I'm concerned too about some of the tariffs on energy. You know, we have done a lot to increase trade in Houston, construction, everything after the pandemic. And all things were growing. Everything has been growing. But now that the Trump tariffs have surfaced, it is threatening Houston's economy. I represent the area where almost the entire ship channel is in. The petrochemical companies all are in my district. The port is in my district. Everybody is trying to figure out
Gentlewoman's
what the
time
hell
has
we're going to
expired.
do.
This was at the core of the confrontation between Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia of Texas and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessant during a recent hearing. The exchange wasn't merely filled with data, statistics, or technical jargon. It revolved around the real-life situations of millions of Americans and highlighted the significant gap between economic discussions in Washington and the everyday battles of families across the nation. Right from the start, Garcia made it clear she wouldn't overlook any procedural evasion. Her very first question focused on something that seemed ordinary, the timing of Secretary Bessant's testimony. His remarks were withheld until the hearing started. While some might view this as a minor complaint about documentation, Garcia expertly highlighted the bigger issue. Late testimony delivery doesn't just inconvenience lawmakers, it creates a power imbalance. The witness, in this case the Treasury Secretary, essentially controls the narrative. Instead of allowing a balanced, analytical exchange, these hearings risk becoming showcases of rehearsed talking points. Garcia's attention to this was not mere nitpicking. She was addressing a more significant issue about transparency and accountability. In governmental oversight, even the minute details matter as they determine whether elected officials can genuinely challenge those in power. However, the defining moment of the hearing was when Garcia posed a seemingly straightforward question. Do you know the current poverty rate in the U.S.? Secretary Bessant hesitated, stumbled, and guessed a figure in the teens. His response was unclear, reflecting not only a lapse in preparation, but something more concerning. Garcia swiftly corrected him, noting the official poverty rate is just over 11%. Though that number might appear modest at first glance, especially compared to historical peaks, it represents more than 37 million Americans living in poverty. That's a reality that can't be ignored. Garcia's frustration was tangible. Her inquiry wasn't a trap, it was a crucial test. How can the Treasury Secretary help shape policies for struggling families if he can't name the poverty rate? The exchange highlighted a broader concern in Washington, where economic dialogue often centers on GDP growth, stock market performance, and investor confidence. Although these are important metrics, they don't provide the entire narrative. Garcia used concrete examples to drive her message home. She highlighted how, for countless families, even buying a simple item like a child's car seat can be financially crippling. To affluent policymakers, this may seem insignificant, but for low-income parents, affording a new car seat can mean the difference between safe transportation and putting a child's life at risk. Many parents resort to buying second-hand seats, often unaware of their safety. That's poverty in practice, beyond mere theory. She also examined the difference between employment statistics and economic security. While unemployment rates are historically low on paper, what about those employed who still remain poor? What about families pushed below the poverty threshold by soaring costs of housing, food, and healthcare? This wasn't merely about catching Bessant off guard, it was about shifting the dialogue. Economic vitality cannot be solely gauged by Wall Street performance. It must be evaluated by whether families can afford essentials like rent, groceries, medical expenses, and childcare. Repeatedly, Garcia returned to the same critique. Bessant's testimony, like many preceding him, was centered on tax reductions, deregulation, and investment-centric policies. The primary beneficiaries of these policies are disproportionately corporations and the wealthy. But what about the everyday people? What about working families struggling to make ends meet across two jobs? Garcia posed a pointed question regarding the proposal for a $5,000 baby bonus, intended as a one-off payment for new parents. She followed up with the obvious question, what happens after the baby is born? Though a lump sum might seem beneficial, it does little to address the persistent structural expenses of raising a child. Families still need to cover ongoing costs for childcare, healthcare, housing, and food, expenses that persist for years without continual assistance. A baby bonus is little more than a political showpiece. Garcia didn't merely focus on abstract numbers. She anchored the conversation within the real economy of her home district, Houston. She illustrated how petrochemical plants, the shipping industry, and port workers, integral to the city's economic machinery, directly encounter the impacts of national economic policies. When tariffs are enacted or trade policies shift, or when global supply chains face disruptions, these workers bear the brunt, through job losses, decreased hours, and increased consumer prices that ripple across her district quickly. To Garcia, this isn't hypothetical, it's personal. Her constituents don't reside in a world of tax shelters and investor dividends. They exist in a realm of paychecks, bills, and grocery expenses. The essence of this hearing lay in how Garcia compelled the audience to look past mere statistics. An 11% poverty rate isn't just a numerical entry in a spreadsheet. It signifies a single mother managing dual jobs yet unable to afford proper childcare. It represents a family forced to choose between paying rent or buying medication, and a child falling behind in school due to hunger and unstable living conditions. By confronting Bessent about the poverty rate, Garcia wasn't indulging in games. She was highlighting the human aspect of economic policy. Garcia's interaction brings to light a crucial truth about how economic policy is typically constructed and debated. The voices of ordinary individuals, particularly the impoverished, are often missing from the dialogue. Hearings usually concentrate on investor confidence, corporate tax cuts, and abstract growth figures. However, if these policies don't lead to better lives for struggling families, then what's the purpose? She reminded the committee that democracy functions effectively only when policies accommodate the needs of everyday individuals, not just those wielding wealth and power. Her persistence wasn't about scoring partisan points. It was about realignment. Economic policy should be evaluated based on how effectively it reduces poverty, broadens opportunity, and ensures dignity. When economic leaders can't openly discuss poverty, or worse, when they seem unprepared to acknowledge its extent, it uncovers a concerning disconnect. That disconnect isn't benign. It influences policy outcomes. If the needs of millions of Americans in dire situations aren't acknowledged in the discourse, then the resulting policies will unavoidably perpetuate the status quo, a system benefiting the affluent while leaving others behind. Garcia's dialogue with Bessent is significant because it cuts through the clamor. She demanded that poverty take center stage in discussions, not an afterthought, but as a pivotal measure of our economic system's effectiveness. This hearing served as a reminder, an essential truth. Economic policy isn't just about markets or growth figures, it's about people. When policymakers overlook this and reduce the economy to graphs and investor reports, they miss the essence. The crucial question isn't about Wall Street's prosperity, it's about family access to secure housing, dependable health care, nutritious meals, and childcare. It's about not forcing parents to raise children under constant financial distress. By urging Bessent on the poverty rate, Garcia highlighted the divide between elite economic rhetoric and actual life challenges. This gap isn't merely uncomfortable, it's dangerous. When millions of Americans feel neglected and unheard, public trust weakens. So the next time someone in power praises economic growth or flaunts tax cuts, recall Garcia's inquiry. Do you know the country's poverty rate? If the response is elusive, dismissive, or uninformed, then we should all question, how can they make informed decisions for the individuals they profess to represent? If this breakdown has unveiled the critical matters behind what might have seemed like a typical hearing, don't just move on. Share this with someone who considers economic policy solely about Wall Street, subscribe if you believe poverty and justice warrant national emphasis, and express your thoughts in the comments, because democracy thrives when ordinary voices, not just the wealthy, dominate the debate.